If you could travel back in time, back to when you had first arrived to China, what would you have done differently? In my case, I wish I would have created a separate WeChat account to accept all the random friend requests from all the random people I came across in China and asked me to exchange WeChats. The other day, I found out that if you scroll all the way down on your contact sections of WeChat, it shows you the number of people you have added. And after 7 years, I somehow managed to add 1,046 people. Jeez, man, I don't know. Maybe some of you think that's not a lot for 7 years, but still, if you divide 1,046 by 7 years, by the 7 years I lived here, that means I added an average of 150 people on WeChat every year. And that's totally ridiculous because there's no way I keep in touch with 150 people every year. And needless to say, I don't keep in touch with 1,046 people a year. And at this point, I think there's nothing I can do about it. I'm not willing to create another WeChat account or delete friends one by one. I wish there was a bulk feature on WeChat to delete friends. But even then, how can you remember the details of each person you added and how you met them? Especially when at least 30% of the people on WeChat set pictures of cats, flowers, babies, trees, or anime characters as their profile pictures. And even when it's a picture of themselves, it's sometimes a photo of them facing away from the camera and looking at the horizon or some sort of silhouette. You can write their actual names, where you met them, where they come from, and this will help you remember, especially when people keep changing their WeChat names, profile pictures, or keep changing their WeChat region to Antarctica, Andorra, Argentina, or whatever country they want people to think they used to live, or whatever country they want people to think they're from. But like the great philosopher Sweet Brown once said, ain't nobody got time for that. Even though it sounds like a good practice, I can't imagine adding a remark for every single person I add on WeChat, so what is my point exactly? And how does any of this have to do with Guanxi or connections in China? Well, keep listening if you want to know how sometimes your Guanxi or connections clutter will get you nowhere. Welcome to China University. This is Chimsi, your student advisor. In this podcast, I will not only talk about the many professional, academic, and personal growth opportunities this country has to offer, but also I'll mention some of the major obstacles foreign students encounter while living in China. I'll share my experience, thoughts, and opinions along with some realistic advice and genuine encouragement. Remember that you can now listen to full episodes not only on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, in where you can find me as China University Student Advisor. You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram as China University Podcast and Twitter as China Uni Podcast. If you have any feedback, comments, or topic ideas, please feel free to contact me on your favorite social media platform or send an email to chinapodcast@outlook.com. Anyway, welcome to today's episode, The Illusion of Connections in China. But before I begin, remember how I caught a cold 2 weeks ago and I thought it was COVID? Well, I caught a cold this week again, but this time I tested positive. But I think I've been very lucky, not only because I have very mild symptoms, but because a few friends in particular have been extremely kind these days and provided me with food and medicines. And I know you all follow my podcast closely, so I just want to say thank you here as well. And for anyone else that is also listening, if you are having a hard time coping with the symptoms, just remember that it's okay not to be okay. So don't hesitate to ask for help if you need it. You don't have to go through this alone. So yeah, Guanxi. For those who don't know the word Guanxi, it means connections or relations in Chinese, and surprisingly, the Oxford Dictionary defines it as the system of social networks and influential relationships which facilitate business and other dealings. And to paraphrase Collins' dictionary, Guanxi is a Chinese social concept based on the exchange of favors, in which personal relationships are considered more important than anything else. And at first glance, I think that Guanxi can be compared to modern day networking in a way, But the major difference is that networking became a thing after the 1980s when company executives had to meet in person to better market their businesses. But also, as opposed to Guanxi, networking strictly encompasses business relations, in my opinion, while Guanxi encompasses a broader spectrum of relations and ideas. And I'm pretty sure that, unlike networking, the Chinese didn't come up with the concept of Guanxi back in the 1980s, but it would certainly come in handy from that point on. But then the internet happened and we switched from traditional social media to today's social media. And the ways to connect with people, there are just so many. Think about all the platforms you use to add, text, or call friends. And if you study the economics before, you know how oversupply in the market tends to decrease the value of commodities. So if you hypothetically would see your connections with others as commodities, would you see the same value in all your connections? Probably not, right? And even if you do, how do you know if the other person attaches the exact same value to the connection between the two of you? But don't get me wrong, connections are not useless. I think they are a key factor in business and academia as well, but they require a fair amount of dedication, and only time will tell whether investing yourself in a certain connection was a good decision or not. Now, the question is, are you willing to invest yourself in every single person that you connect with? Probably. The answer is no. You have limited resources and time, meaning that you can't invest yourself in every single person that you run into. This seems totally logical, right? But in my opinion, and after being in China for a while, foreigners entered this autopilot mode when it comes to connecting with people. And I think that scanning QR codes made this compulsive WeChat exchange even easier than before. It was revolutionary, of course, and maybe even a good thing. But how do you know which connection is going to take you to the next level or which connection is going to play a role in your life? I think that it's fair to say that we humans are not calculating beings, not 100% of the time. But sometimes we just connect with people out of politeness or mere curiosity. But I think that after a while, the autopilot kicks in and we end up with 1,000 WeChat contacts that contribute to nothing but to our social media clutter. And I think it's normal because whenever you connect with someone you just met and end up exchanging WeChats, you have no idea what to expect and what you're going to get out of this relation between the two of you. And this reminds me of the spray and pray method that can be applied to a variety of fields, including photography. During my early 20s, I used to do photography with three other friends, and I would end up running a small photography company with one of them. But at the very beginning, we were total amateurs and we're scared of screwing up key moments of the events that we were covering by taking horrible pictures. So, subconsciously, we would spray and pray, or shoot and pray, shoot hundreds of photos and pray that at least one of them was going to be good. But after every event, we would end up going through countless photos, checking which ones were worth it and which ones were not. And as a result, we would spend hours of post production discarding hundreds of useless and repetitive photos. I think you can compare that to going for a night out and waking up in the morning with 3 or 4 random people, friends, or friend requests on WeChat. But unlike the digital clutter I had to deal with after every event, connection clutter builds up over time. And the reason why I wanted to talk about the illusion of connections today is so that you can come up with an idea of the type of connections that are not worth your time and are not going to take you further in life. First, connections you make with Chinese or foreigners in bars and clubs. Oh, look, if you're trying to connect with people at a bar or a club just for the sake of having fun, go ahead and do it. It's fine. But don't take these connections very seriously, especially if the other person makes exaggerated claims about who they are or who they know and what they can do, or if they start making promises to you and including you in their future plans, even though you two just met or know very little about each other. Nowadays, and of course 7 years late, I have a system in where I accept or reject WeChat requests based on the answer to the following questions. Question number 1. Am I going to be willing to start a conversation or hang out with this person after tonight? Question number 2. Am I going to see this person often? Question number 3. Do you see yourself becoming close friends with this person in the near future? If the answer is no for at least 2 out of the 3 questions, then I don't even bother to ask for the person's WeChat. And if they ask to add me on WeChat, I let them scan my QR code, but never accept their friend request. Or my favorite one, which is take a photo of their QR code because, sorry, I don't have data, or because, sorry, my phone is about to die. Chances are that a few hours later, they're not even going to remember they attempted to add your WeChat in the first place. So let me tell you about my rules of thumb to spot low-value conversations that usually represent low-value connections. Let's start with conversations that are usually filled with drunken plans and drunken promises. These type of low-value conversations are usually filled with drunken plans and drunken promises, which is very similar to the next rule of thumb for spotting low-value connections, which is sour plans and sour promises. And look, this one is more related to networking. I don't know what's up with some foreigners in China, including foreign students. I guess you can compare this phenomena to the Messiah's complex tourists get whenever they visit Jerusalem and think their trip to the Holy Land has a greater purpose. And I make this comparison because when students first arrive to China, or foreigners in general, they are justifiably mesmerized by everything in China, especially if they live in a bustling tier 1 or tier 2 city. So as soon as they know about another foreigner that has its own project or company, they also want to have their own too, which is not a bad idea at all. But what you might notice is that some people will want to get you and as many people as possible involved in whatever little project or startup they have. And I think that more than often, because we want to support our friends, we agree to take part in whatever project they have in mind. Again, based on my experience, these projects or startups usually end up nowhere. And at first, it will feel as if you're part of something big and new, but chances are that most of these college projects and startups will fade away after graduation. So you really want to ask yourself whether you want to spend your precious college years fulfilling someone else's fantasies, or if you want to start your own projects and execute them. For example, when I started this podcast, I never thought about using my connections to execute my idea. I did, however, ask my friends for feedback and their opinions, but I didn't think about getting anyone involved because I think that my friends would be getting absolutely nothing from taking part in this project of mine. Having a whole team of friends working for my podcast would certainly make me feel good about my idea of starting a podcast, but it would be an organizational overkill considering the small scale of my project. So at this point, you might be thinking, it seems that Guanxi in China is really an illusion. And you know what? It's not. At least not for everyone. I bet millions of people in China and around the world could tell you that connecting with others is crucial in business and in life. But I still think that Guanxi can be an illusion for some people because, unlike traditional networking, Guanxi requires a slow burn approach to have a genuine connection. And it can take months or even years for two people to consolidate a long lasting connection. So, attending networking events, seminars, workshops, job fairs, or joining clubs or associations in school might help you expand your network, but in most cases, that's about it. And expanding your network doesn't necessarily mean that you're connecting with people. Sometimes it just means that you have more email addresses or WeChat contacts than before. So let me tell you about these networking events, seminars, or workshops, or other related activities in China. Sometimes they're organized by your school, or sometimes they're independently organized events. And something that you have to know is that sometimes the schools just organize events for the sake of having an event. They invite professors or speakers from other universities, have snacks, and take photos. So If the reason you attend these events is out of curiosity or because you want to socialize and listen to a speech, then you have the right mindset. But if you're expecting the sole fact of joining these events to catapult your professional or academic career, you'll be highly disappointed. Guanxi between teachers and students and between professionals takes time to build. And I'm not saying that because it takes time to build Guanxi with people, you shouldn't even try to connect. But you should know that no professional or teacher attend these events hoping that they can meet as many students as possible so they can help them. And the same applies for independently organized networking events. Again, if all you want to do is to make friends, eat, and have fun, then you won't be disappointed by these events. But if you think that people go to these events to get to know you and help you get what you are looking for, academic wise or professional wise, you'll be totally disappointed because, based on my experience, again, my experience and my opinion, so take my words with a grain of salt, some people often get these networking events and trade fairs mixed up. So more than often, you'll attend networking events in where absolutely everyone is trying to sell you something on the spot. And sometimes some events are just going to be full of people trying to sell their products or services desperately, but no one is there to buy a thing. And networking or building connections are usually not a priority for them. So you might find interactions to be a little bit disingenuous. And if you introduce yourself as a student, I'm telling you, there's a big chance that no one will even take you seriously during the event. Again, that's just my opinion. So throughout this episode, I think I've used the term Guanxi and networking interchangeably. But now, after researching Guanxi and networking, I've realized that Guanxi can help you build a network, but networking might not necessarily help you build Guanxi. So yes, Guanxi can indeed be an illusion because sometimes what you think is Guanxi is nothing more than networking, and sometimes the only things that keep us connected to other members of a network are phone numbers or WeChat contacts. And most of the times you cannot tell how crucial your connections with others are going to be later in life. And I guess that's why we don't think much about the people we connect with or even people that we add on WeChat, because we're mostly adventurous and curious beings. And like I said before, we humans are not calculating beings, at least not 100% of the time. And I'm not saying that to build Guanxi with others, you have to be calculating, but you certainly have to be selective. And I know that the following statement sounds like a big cliche, but when it comes to building Guanxi, connecting with people or networking is more about the quality and not the quantity. Because even though many connections can take you to many places, it often just takes one good connection to get where you want to be in life. All right, that's it for today. Next week, I'll talk about feeling homesick in China, especially during the winter holidays when you can get sick but don't get to go home. Let's talk about it next week. You have just listened to China University Podcast. This was Chimsy, your student advisor. I'll see you next week.